witness, please.
You can call Jeremy Phelps back to the stand for limited purpose.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll administer another oath since it's been a few days. Penalty of law that the testimony you will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
All right, please be seated. Tell us your name again, please.
My name is Jeremy William Phelps, Jeremy William Phelps.
Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, just to remind folks, you work where?
I work with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
And have you been present in court throughout this trial thus far?
I have.
Were you present when there was testimony from a representative of a company called Google about some email accounts linked to the defendant?
I was.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Sir, I'm handing you what has previously been marked and referenced as People's Exhibits 1211B and 1210B. Have you seen those discs before?
Yes, I have.
How have you seen them?
I personally review the discs.
Now, we had the representative from Google come and testify about the ownership of those accounts and the contents of those particular discs. Did you have the ability to then go through and pull out individual emails from those discs?
I did. I reviewed both discs. I used a viewer to review each email and pulled out each email that I deemed relevant.
Did you do anything to manipulate or change the content of any of the emails that we're about to talk about?
I did not.
Did you just simply print them off from the provided viewer based on what was contained on the disc previously testified to?
I did.
Do some of those emails include attachments that are photographs?
On the two separate discs, there are different photographs which were sent by an iPhone.
And were those also included in the emails that we're about to talk about?
They are.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
These are those packets that I showed you. Okay, same thing. Yeah, I think so. Sir, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibits 1081A and 1081B. Take a look at those and tell us if you recognize those packets.
Yes. They are similar, or they are the emails that I printed out.
Okay, and did they look like they did when you printed them out?
Yes.
Any changes been made to them, alterations, anything like that?
No alterations.
Now look, there's a log sheet that is on the top of each one of those email packets. Do those log sheets let us know which email account the attached emails came from?
They do.
Can you read for us by exhibit number which packet goes to which email account?
Yes. People's Exhibit 1081A belongs to D. sherlockb@gmail.com. People's Exhibit 1081B belongs to classicjimbo@gmail.com.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to move for the admission of People's Exhibits 1081B and, sir, help me with that other one. Hold on, I may have it here.
1081A, I think is the other one.
Correct.
Yes, sir, thank
Is
you.
there any objection?
May we approach, Your Honor?
Yes. Can I see those?
Yes.
right, the objection is overruled, and so People's Exhibits P-TR-1081A and 1081B are admitted, and I incorporate by reference a previous ruling that I made related to this. And to the extent that I previously referred to it only as 1081A, that should be corrected. It's 1081A and 1081B. Here you go, sir. Thank you. All right, Mr. Proctor, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, before we start to publish some of the stuff that are in these exhibits, I want to clarify something. There are those log sheets we referenced on the cover of each of those Gmail account packets. Were those the same exhibits that we introduced in through the representative from Google when you were here and she testified?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to, Your Honor, with the court's permission, publish certain portions of this by the TV monitors and then publish the bulk of the written emails through copies that we have to the rest of the jury after that.
Okay.
First thing I want to do is I want to ask you about the classicjimbo@gmail.com account.
Okay.
Now, you had the ability to go through the content of the emails and attachments from that entire account. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Was there any use for this account other than for activities related to the websites that we heard testimony about in the past 2 days?
Correct. The only activity in this particular email account related to adult dating type websites, subscriptions, cancellation of a membership, and one email to open up a Squarespace account.
Let me ask you about, and ma'am, can we get, do I read this thing here? Okay. 1081B-4. Can you tell from the information you pulled off of that Google provided disk when this photograph was emailed to this account?
This particular photograph, based on the email records in classicjimbo@gmail.com, shows July 5th, a Thursday of 2012 at 2:42 a.m. It was being emailed from an iPhone to this account.
Thank you. Ma'am, can we get 1081B-7? Same questions about the origin of this photograph based on the information you discovered in that emails.
Yes, based on this photo, it was sent from an iPhone for James Holmes to classicjimbo@gmail.com on July 5th, Thursday, 2012 at 2:42 a.m.
Thank you. 1081B-10, please. Same questions for this one, Special Agent, bless you.
Yes, this photograph, same as the previous two, was sent from an iPhone from James Holmes to classicjimbo@gmail.com on July 11th, Wednesday, 2012.
But I'm telling you, the way your voice inflected, I thought there was something else coming.
No,
So,
that's
okay.
it.
All right, thank you. Ma'am, can you take that down? Let's talk about the dsherlockb@gmail.com account. Now, you had the opportunity to go through the emails on that particular disk. I want to ask you what you didn't find on that disk based on the information. Did you find any evidence in that account that it was ever used for making any of the purchases that we've been discussing here over the past 5 weeks?
No, it was not.
Was it ever used, as best you can tell, for any of the adult dating websites that we previously discussed from classicjimbo@gmail.com?
No, it was not.
Now, were there communications to and from the defendant to someone named Goober on that account?
Yes, there were.
And is that the bulk of the emails that we have included in this particular exhibit?
It is.
What I want to ask you about specifically, though, are at the back of this exhibit, and let's clarify this, are these in chronological order of when they were sent or received?
They were.
All right, so let's go to the back. I want to talk to you about emails starting to be sent on July 18th, 2012 at 1:58:03 a.m., at least according to the email. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Now, how many photographs are there that were sent at the end of this activity on this email account?
6.
Ma'am, would you publish for us 1081A-25? Oh, really? Okay. This particular photograph, Special Agent, when does it indicate it was sent and by whom?
It shows that it was sent from an iPhone account for James Holmes to the dsherlockb@gmail.com, July 18th, Wednesday, 2012.
Is it entitled anything?
Q.
Number 28? This particular photograph, tell us when and from whom it was sent, please.
This particular photograph was sent from an iPhone for James Holmes to dsherlockb@gmail.com on July 18th, Wednesday, 2012, with the subject W.
This photograph, Special Agent, is this consistent with the exterior of the Century 16 movie theater?
It is.
31, please. Tell us when and from whom this one was sent, please.
This was sent from an iPhone for James Holmes to dsherlockb@gmail.com on July 18th, Wednesday, 2012, with the subject T.
This photograph, looking at the objects in here,
Yes.
are these consistent with the other photographs that we've entered from the defendant's kitchen, specifically 2434, 4212, and 4222?
Yes, they are.
Ma'am, can I have 34, please? Tell us again from whom and what time this was sent and received.
This photograph was sent from an iPhone for James Holmes to dsherlockb@gmail.com on July 18th, Wednesday, 2012, with the subject E.
Is this picture consistent with previously admitted exhibits 4226 and 4156?
Yes, they are.
This appears to be the interior of the defendant's apartment.
Yes.
Exhibit 37, please, ma'am. Again, from whom and what time, sir?
This was from an iPhone for James Holmes to dsherlockb@gmail.com on July 18th, Wednesday, 2012, with the subject R.
This photograph, are these consistent with the doors that at the time were on the exterior of the Century 16 movie theater?
Yes, they were.
40, please. While she's doing that thing. What time and when was this sent and received, please?
This photograph was sent from an iPhone for James Holmes to dsherlockb@gmail.com on July 18th, Wednesday, 2012, with the subject "Why?"
Is this photograph consistent with previously admitted exhibits 4177, 4191, and 4197?
Yes, they are.
Does this appear to be the interior of the defendant's apartment?
Yes.
I want to ask you about the titles for these pictures. You said some letters. What do they spell out?
They spell out QWERTY. So if you were looking on a keyboard, top left-hand side, it starts with a Q and it spells out QWERTY, QWERTY.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, at this point, I'd like, with the court's permission, to provide your staff the 24 copies of the dsherlockb@gmail.com emails for publication.
Please approach first, if you don't mind.
There's something else I forgot to ask you. Take a look at the dsherlockb@gmail.com. Based on your review of that disk and the emails that you've printed off, is there a gap in time in the communication to and from the defendant and someone named Goober?
Yes, there are.
Approximately what is that gap in terms of the calendar?
Calendar, you've got a gap from May until July.
And when you say May and July, here's what I want you to look at. Look at email dated July 31st, 2011.
Yes. I have.
That's an email to and from the defendant and someone named Goober?
That's correct. Also known as the defendant's mother.
Okay. And then there is not another email to and from the defendant and that person until June of 2012. Is that what you discovered going through that disk?
Correct.
All right. Are you aware from other email accounts of the communication that took place between approximately July of 2011 and June of 2012 between the defendant and his mother?
I am. There was another email account used.
Okay. At this time, Your Honor, if I could approach with the instruction.
Yes, members of the jury, let me give you an instruction before we publish this exhibit. I have granted the request to publish the exhibit, and we're going to publish it in the same way that we did the last one, just to expedite things. And so please remember that we're going to retrieve the copies from you after you've had a chance to review it, but this will avoid having a single copy being passed around from one person to the next. Ms. Akel, hold on just a second. There's an instruction I want to give you, and you've heard me give you this instruction before. You've heard that there have been some hearsay objections, and I have ruled on some of those. In general, the law does not allow statements that are made outside the courtroom to be introduced into evidence for the truth of that statement. There are some exceptions, and there are some statements that are made outside the courtroom that are not considered hearsay. So, for example, the statements that a defendant may have made outside the courtroom are admissible, and they're not considered hearsay. There are other statements, however, that are considered hearsay if they're made outside the courtroom. there are some statements in these emails that are not from the defendant. Those statements are being introduced only for the limited purpose of placing the defendant's statements in context. You are not to consider them for any other purpose. Does everybody understand that? Yes. And people nodding their head yes and saying yes. Okay, with that then, Ms. Zagel and Ms. Gerlings, if you would please distribute exhibits number 10, P-TR-1081A and P-TR-1081B.
Your Honor, for clarification for the court, we did not include copies for publication of the classicjimbo@gmail.com since we had published them through the TV. So it's just, I think, the other one.
All right, so it's only P-TR-1081A.
Correct.
All right. Okay, thank you. The record should reflect that we just finished publishing People's Exhibit P-TR-1081A. I remind you again, folks, that any statements in that exhibit by people other than the defendant were not admitted for the truth of the contents of the statements. They were admitted only for the limited purpose of placing the defendant's statements in context. Okay, with that then, the people may call their next witness. Actually, before you do, we still have this witness. Mr. Brockler, you may resume your direct examination. I'm eager to move things along.
Stipulated. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, is there any cross-examination at this time?
No, no.
All right, and there do not appear to be any questions from the jury. So, sir, you may resume your seat. Thank you. All right, now call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, the people call William Reed to the stand.
Good morning, sir. If you would come around here, please, and if you would raise your right hand so that I can administer an oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
All right, please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name for the record?
William Howard Reed, R-E-I-D, M-D.
And can you please spell your first and middle names?
William, W-I-L-L-I-A-M, Howard, H-O-W-A-R-D.
Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Good morning, Dr. Reed.
Morning.
Sir, were you retained to conduct a forensic psychiatric examination of the defendant seated here at this table and provide opinions based upon that examination?
Yes, I was.
And before we get into your background, I want to ask you, were you selected by the people of the state of Colorado to be that psychiatrist?
Through the Mental Health Institute at Pueblo, if that's the people, yes.
Were you picked by the
But not by the
prosecution?
prosecution. Not by the prosecution.
Were you picked by the defense?
No.
And the Colorado Mental Health Institute of Pueblo is the one that selected you?
That's my understanding and made the recommendation for my appointment.
Is it your understanding, too, based on the orders and correspondence from this court, that you were appointed by the court to play that role?
Yes.
Now, before we are able to talk to you about the things that you did and that the opinions that you came to, we got to talk a little bit about your background. What I'd like to do is to talk about that background, and then we'll talk about the things that you did, and then we'll talk about the video recorded statements that you made, and then we'll follow up at the end with some additional questions, okay?
Okay.
First thing I want to do is ask you, how long have you been a psychiatrist?
40-something years.
40-something?
40. So just turned 70, and I finished my training when I was 30, and most of my training I would have considered myself a psychiatrist as well.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Now, sir, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1224. Take a look at that, and if you recognize it, tell us what it is.
This is my curriculum vitae, or resume, as of April of this year.
And is that a fair compilation of the different things that you have done professionally in the areas of psychiatry, forensic psychiatry, and your education?
Yes, it is, although it doesn't include cases I've been involved in. It has to do more with the psychiatry.
And it deals with your background, education, publications, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Now, if we were to go through that thing line by line, we'd be here a long time, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Okay. What I want to do then is I want to admit that, but then ask you to help us highlight a couple of the areas in here and explain some of the things that may not be obvious from it. Is that fair?
Sure.
Would that give us a fair appreciation of your experience and expertise?
Yes.
Judge, I have no objection to the admission of the exhibit.
All right. Are you moving it to admission?
Based on that, sure.
All right.
Yes, Your Honor.
P-TR-1224 is admitted without objection.
Doctor, you can use that for reference. I mean, 40-something years is a lot to go through. Let's start off with your education. Do you have an undergraduate degree involving mental health?
Yes.
Tell us about it.
I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Minnesota. That's not to say clinical psychology, but related to mental health.
And then did you end up getting a medical degree?
Yes, I have an MD from the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis.
Is that a prerequisite to being a psychiatrist?
Yes, you have to be a physician to be a psychiatrist.
Can you tell us what is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
Psychologist, and I'm assuming here clinical psychologist, usually with a PhD, is a person who also works in clinical mental health, but doesn't have the physician background, likely doesn't work with the medical aspects of mental illness and mental health, such as prescribing things, how the brain works, certain kinds of diagnoses and things like that. Psychologists, of course, have other kinds of expertise and work a lot helping patients, evaluating patients for certain things.
Did you end up specializing after you got your medical degree in psychiatry?
Yes, I finished my MD, went to the University of California at Davis, which includes Sacramento Medical Center, and completed psychiatric residency, that is the post-MD training in psychiatry there.
Now that got interrupted, didn't it?
Yes, when I was through with 1 year, I got drafted, spent 2 years in the Army at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and then went back.
But let's be certain, you weren't in the infantry during those 2 years.
No, I was drafted as a psychiatrist and spent 2 years being a psychiatrist at Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Did you also gain experience in the field of psychiatry while you were at Fort Polk?
Yes, I saw patients. I supervised some patient care. I, at various times, ran the psychiatric unit of the hospital there and eventually was chief of mental hygiene for the base, which was give or take 20,000 generally young men, a few women who were there for basic training and advanced infantry training.
When that was completed, did you come back and complete your residency in psychiatry?
Yes, I returned just as common, returned to the same place, picked up where I left off, and 2 years later finished the residency.
Now, can you give us, without going into every single line of detail that's contained in your CV, give us sort of the list of positions and jobs that you have had in psychiatry since you completed that residency?
Sure. While in the residency, I also got a degree in public health related to health administration and planning. All that came to a conclusion around age 30. I left residency and was in private practice of psychiatry in Santa Fe for a couple of years, from about 70 to 72. No, I'm sorry. That would have been 75 to 77. After a couple of years there, I went to the University of Nebraska College of Medicine and Nebraska Medical Center, where I was a faculty psychiatrist doing both clinical work and research. Became director of residency training there, that is training other people to become psychiatrists, and director of psychiatric education, that is training general medical students in things related to psychiatry. I was there for 9 years, left there and came to Texas. I'm a native Texan. Came to San Antonio for private practice and to help run a small psychiatric hospital. Did that for 3 years. After 3 years, was fortunate enough to be appointed medical director for the state of Texas for all the mental health and mental retardation operations of the state, and was the medical director of that department for 7 years. I think that brings us up to about 1996. Stepped down in 96 and have been in private practice of clinical and forensic psychiatry ever since.
Now, let's talk about those early years. Were you in the practice of seeing and evaluating and treating patients for psychiatric issues in those first, up until I guess 96?
Up until 89, I was day to day evaluating, treating patients, supervising the care of patients, actually providing care for patients, etc. In 89, when I became the state medical director, that became largely supervisory, in which I was let me say that the chief of the medical enterprise, the psychiatric and mental health enterprise for the state of Texas, still saw some patients within that context, but didn't follow them. It wasn't a particularly clinical, strong clinical position.
Now, you've continued to see patients, though, even after that, just in a different capacity?
I continued to some extent at the beginning, saw patients in consultation for the other psychiatrists and psychologists within the Texas mental health system, which is state hospitals, state centers, many community mental health centers, things like that, residences for the mentally retarded, but did not, I want to be clear, did not follow patients myself. They were other people's patients.
Let's be clear then about what consultation means and how it happens. Tell us about that.
Different clinicians, physicians, psychologists, etc., might have an issue that they weren't sure about. A tragedy might occur, such as a suicide. A clinical question would come up that they wanted some help with, or some teaching. Did a lot of teaching within that context in various places in the state, for the state. That's my memory of what most of that was about.
Would you be called in on complicated, difficult cases?
Yes, from time to time. We had very good physicians. I don't want to say I was called in on everyone, but certainly would get asked sometimes to review complicated or controversial cases and would do so.
Now, the patients that you've seen over the course of your career, first off, can you give us an estimation of how many patients that you have seen as a psychiatrist?
I'm sure it's been thousands. I don't know whether it's tens of thousands, but I'm sure it's been thousands.
And can you give us a characterization of maybe the percentage of those patients that suffered from what we're going to later talk about are serious or significant mental illness?
The considerable majority suffered from some serious level of mental illness. A large number, perhaps a majority, suffered from what I'll call chronic and severe mental illness, that is, illnesses such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, something we call major depressive disorder, things like that. I saw some patients in psychotherapy that one would not notice as mentally ill, but they wished to have psychotherapy. Most of the folks that I saw, no matter where I was, were pretty seriously ill people.
Boy, can you think of something, doctor, that's within the, and we'll talk about what these two manuals are, DSM-4, DSM-5, that you haven't been confronted with at some point during your career?
I'm sure there are some that I haven't seen, but many are more common than others. The major ones related to different anxiety kinds of problems, different depression kinds of problems, different mood stability kinds of problems, different problems of thinking like schizophrenia, different personality disorders. I'm pretty familiar with and have seen a lot of those. I should point out I'm not a child psychiatrist, and so I don't see or evaluate or treat children and have not. And there are certain other things in those diagnostic manuals that have more to do with brain diseases, the kinds of things neurologists might see, and I haven't done very much and don't do very much in those areas.
You've dealt with delusions,
Sure.
psychosis,
Sure.
and we'll talk about more of what the details of those things are. In terms of your career, you've talked a lot about your experience thus far as a clinical psychiatrist and someone who supervises clinical psychiatrists. Have you also spent time developing an expertise in forensic psychiatry?
Yes.
Can you tell us what forensic psychiatry is?
Sure. My definition is work at the interface of mental health and law. And there are lots of those interfaces, one of which we'll talk about here, I'm sure. You start out being a psychiatrist, and that's the core of your knowledge and the core of what you do. But it's at some interface with the law, and so you take into account and try to learn about the vocabulary of the law as it's relevant to psychiatry, different issues that come up for people who have some mental impairment or mental issue.
Sir, is one measure of someone who's become an expert in their field, like psychiatry or forensic psychiatry, certain board certifications?
Yes.
Tell us what a board certification is, and then tell us if you got them.
Okay. The official board certifications, such as a board-certified general surgeon or a board-certified psychiatrist, arises out of a very reputable process governed by something called the American Board of Medical Specialties. In psychiatry, a subsidiary of the American Board of Medical Specialties is the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. That certification is the primary and the only, in my view, reputable one in the U.S. For clinical psychiatrists. And I'm certified, as are many other people, by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in psychiatry. The American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology has a number of subspecialty boards, including one for forensic psychiatry, that is psychiatrists that work at the interface of mental health and law. I believe they call it special qualifications in forensic psychiatry, and I have that as well. I also have a certification in psychiatric administration and management, which I don't think is relevant here.
Okay. How about where are you licensed to practice?
I'm licensed to practice medicine in Texas and 6 other states.
And those are contained within Exhibit 1224, sir?
Yes, they are.
You've talked a little bit about that, and I want to get into some of the other marks of expertise, but since we've distinguished now between clinical and forensic psychiatry, I want to ask you, do the terms that you use in forensic psychiatry, whether it's about sanity or competence or personal responsibility, are those terms that are the same as or common to clinical psychiatry?
The terms may be the same, but the definitions are often quite different, so that it's important that a psychiatrist who does forensic work understand that the word, for example, sanity, has a much different meaning to a criminal court than it does at a cocktail party or when you're talking with other psychiatrists. As a matter of fact, psychiatrists rarely use the phrase sanity or insanity.
You're also licensed to prescribe drugs by the DEA, is that fair?
In the states in which I'm licensed to practice medicine, yes.
Yes. Is one measure of someone's expertise in a field whether or not they've been recognized by other members of that field with certain awards or commendations?
That's one measure, sure.
Could you talk to us about any awards or commendations that you've received in these fields?
Sure.
And you don't have to go through all of them. Just
I've gotten a couple of teaching awards through the years, clinical teaching awards, some lecturing awards through the years, not a huge number. My most recent book won what's called the Guttmacher Award, which is jointly given by the American Psychiatric Association and the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law as the best publication that year in the field of psychiatry and law. That came last year. I think it's a 2013 award given in 2014, but it's a nice plaque.
is one of the ways that someone can keep their level of knowledge and expertise up in an area to belong to certain associations or have memberships of different groups?
Yes, provided one participates in them, yes.
All right. Tell us about some of the ones that you participate in actively.
I participate in the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law, the American Psychiatric Association, the Texas Society of Psychiatric Physicians, all of which are organizations of colleagues and peers. You go to the meetings, you may do other things, and learn from your peers, learn about your peers. Each of those has a lot of opportunities for continuing education, which is important in many fields, including medicine, so that a lot of the continuing education one gets is gotten through those organizations. And by the way, continuing education is required to keep one's license and to keep one's certification.
Is the full list of those also indicated in this curriculum vitae exhibit?
Yes.
Another measure of expertise, doctor, would it be whether or not you have published in the area of psychiatry or forensic psychiatry? Is that one other measure of expertise?
That's one other measure.
Have you published in these areas?
Yes.
And is there a distinction to be made between publications that are peer-reviewed and not peer-reviewed?
Yes.
Tell us what peer review means.
Peer-reviewed publications are those which, before they're put into print, are reviewed and passed on by at least one's peers and hopefully experts in the field in which the publication is. For example, if I write a paper on suicide and want to publish it in the Journal of Psychiatric Practice, they don't just publish it because it's Bill Reed's article. They send it out to 2 or 3 or 4 other people without my name on it, anonymously, and say, is this worth publishing? If it is, they're likely to publish it. If the peers say it's not, they're unlikely to publish it. There are a lot of other ways that one can get published, send things to magazines or newspapers. That's a little easier, and less reliable if one is looking for scientific information or academic information.
I haven't done the math on all these, but have you published numerous peer-reviewed articles?
That's fair to say, yes.
Have you also published books in the area of psychiatry and forensic psychiatry? We heard about one of them.
Yes.
And are all of those, numbered and listed in Exhibit 1224?
Yes.
Can I ask you about the DSM-4 and 5? Tell us what that is.
Sure. Many decades ago, the American Psychiatric Association began to try to bring together psychiatric diagnoses so that different psychiatrists and other physicians would use the same definitions when they said diagnosis A or diagnosis B. That process has refined over the decades until back in the 80s, I think, the fourth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM, so DSM-4. That edition was published, which is really a pretty good manual, pretty well reviewed, the result of thousands of hours of individual and committee work. Last year, that was officially superseded by the fifth edition of that manual, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, fifth edition, DSM-5.
For that DSM-4, that was around for a long time, wasn't it?
Yes, 20, give or take 20 years or so.
And the DSM-5 just came into being pretty recently.
Pretty recently, last
And
year.
I'm holding up a big old purple book that says DSM-5 on it. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
That DSM-4, is some of the publications, presentations, and things that you've done directly related to teaching psychiatrists and other mental health professionals how to apply the DSM-4?
Yes, I and others with me have created training guides for diagnosis that were specifically keyed to the DSM-4. We've created videos of patients or purported actors playing patients to help teach people about diagnosis and specifically about diagnosis within the DSM-4. And we just recently updated the program guide for the videos to apply to DSM-5 as well, but that hasn't come out yet.
Is one other measure of someone's expertise in an area, I guess the invitation to and the presentation of psychiatry and forensic psychiatry topics at different psychiatric professional associations?
Yes.
Have you taught all over the world, sir?
I've taught a lot. I've taught in Europe. I've taught in China, Canada, and the U.S. Not everywhere, but a lot of places.
Are you not agreeing to the whole world because you didn't say Antarctica? I mean, is that what's left?
In the countries that I just mentioned, several countries in Europe and in the U.S. and Canada.
Would another measure of someone's expertise be how many times they have been qualified as an expert by other courts in the areas of psychiatry and forensic psychiatry?
I suppose that would be a measure that's up to judges in specific areas of expertise, but it indicates that someone said, yes, you're qualified to testify.
Can you tell us how many times you have been qualified as an expert?
It will be however many times I've testified, which is on the list I think you have. I think it's on the order of 60 or 70.
And can you tell us, if you don't recall every single one, I get it, but can you give us an indication of which states, courts and states have recognized you as an expert in these fields?
It'll be 12, 15, maybe 20 states. I've done work in many more than that, but actually testified in a court in those states, I think at least a dozen and probably closer to 20.
Have you done testimony as an expert for the federal system as well as the state?
Yes.
And you've been recognized as an expert in both of those arenas?
Qualified to testify in both the state and federal arenas, yes.
Have you ever been offered for an expert in these fields and not been qualified by the court as an expert, not been recognized as an expert?
No.
You talked about the number of times that you have testified as an expert in these areas. How many do you think it is?
I think it's on the order of 60 or 70. I hope I'm not confusing deposition with court testimony.
Of those times that you have testified as an expert, how many of those were criminal cases?
It's a minority. It's about 12 to 15 in which it was a criminal case and it involved something related to the criminal case.
And the nature of those criminal cases, were they largely murder, capital cases?
The majority were murder and the majority of those were capital.
In that group of cases for which you have provided testimony as an expert, and you know what, let me back up. Let me ask you this. Have you served as an expert in criminal cases that didn't end up going to trial?
Sure.
More than the 15-ish or so times you described to us?
It would make the number higher, and there are two reasons that I might not go to trial. One is the case might be resolved without a trial, as frequently happens. The other might be that the lawyer who retained me, for whatever reason, would say, thanks for your opinions, but I'm not going to use your opinions, so you don't have to testify.
Let's focus on the 15 or so that you have described testifying in these criminal cases. For those times that you've served as an expert, have you been appointed by a court before to serve in the capacity like you are here?
One time appointed by a judge to serve for the judge.
Let's talk about the rest of them. How many times were you retained by a defendant to serve as their expert for issues like this?
All but one. That would be 12 or 13, I believe.
Is that one? That's the one time you've been hired by the prosecution to testify on it?
It's the one time that I was hired by the prosecution to assess the case and eventually was asked to testify.
Okay, and that's, again, that's not this case.
Correct.
13 to 1. Okay. Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes?
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to tender Dr. William Reed to the court as an expert in the area of psychiatry and forensic psychiatry and ask that the court recognize him as the same.
Is there any objection?
No, thank you.
All right, without objection, the court accepts Dr. Reed as an expert witness in the field of psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. That means that I have found him to be qualified to render expert opinions in psychiatry and forensic psychiatry, and he may do so now. That is pursuant to Rule 702 of the Colorado Rules of Evidence and the decision in People v. Schreck, which is cited at 22 Pacific 3rd, 68, Colorado, 2001. I'll give you the instruction, folks, that I have been giving you throughout with respect to expert testimony, and that is that you're not bound by the testimony of a witness who testifies as an expert. The credibility of an expert's testimony is to be considered as that of any other witness. You may believe all of an expert witness's testimony, part of it, or none of it. The way that you give the testimony is entirely your decision. Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Dr. Reed, we've already established that you were retained by the court and the state hospital to do an assessment of the defendant and provide an opinion about his sanity, specifically over the period of July 19th, July 20th, 2012. True?
True.
Is it your understanding that the standard to be applied under Colorado was to determine whether or not the defendant suffered from a mental disease or defect that prevented him from knowing right and wrong, both legally and morally?
Yes.
Was it also part of that standard that you're going to apply to this, that the defendant suffered from a disease or defect, mental disease or defect, that prevented him from forming the intent to commit murder after deliberation?
My opinion is that he did not, is that whatever he suffered from, it did not prevent him from forming the intent and knowing what he was doing and the consequences of what he was doing.
And thank you for that. You've jumped ahead just a little bit. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure that we understood the standard that Colorado applies and that you made your opinion based on that. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. We're going to get to days of information that
Judge,
you...
may we approach briefly?
Yes. All right, members of the jury, it's time for lunch, so we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break at this time. Please make sure you follow all my advisements during the lunch break. Thank you. All right, everyone may be seated. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom now. Is there anything else at this time on behalf of the prosecution? Is there anything else on behalf of the defense?
No, thank you.
All right, I'm going to think about the issue that we discussed, and then we'll proceed after lunch. I'll see you back here after the lunch break. Have a good lunch. The court will be in recess.